All right. It is a beautiful day in paradise. It is Wednesday, June 8th, and we have a great show today. But before we get rolling with our great new guest speaker, let's talk to our own and only John Sibley Butler for some music. All right.
We'll have a little bark today.
Very nice. Very nice. John Butler, how are you, sir?
I am doing just fine. There's lots going on. It looks like it's the perfect storm of everything. Of course, we have 100-degree plus weather now in Austin, which is really should be August weather. So we have now the concern with the grid again. That's everywhere. Mm-hmm. We have the war that is completely disrupting the supply chain. And we have the stock market that's going up and down all the time. And then, of course, we have the mass killings in South Texas. And it looks like the news repeats itself over and over again. The bright side is we graduated students from the colleges and universities in America to look at what they need to do in the future. But certainly we need a lot of great things to think about in the future. We need a lot of great leadership. And this is where we are, and it's been very, very interesting. And then if you look at the how much stuff, the cost is, I mean, the price of gas is just getting, out of sight. So this is kind of where we are in interesting times. And it started with the pandemic.
Yeah, well said, well said. Let's go to our own Llewellyn King. Llewellyn, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you, and it's gorgeous here in Rhode Island. It is not 100 degrees, and by all I can make out, the grid is fairly stable here, although I never trust that. I did make a television program yesterday on the electric supply this summer, and it's not a pretty picture. You have a confluence of many things, especially weather, likely to cause disruptions down the center of the country into the Southwest Power Pool, and all around Texas, if not in Texas. And I suspect, having talked to several utilities in Texas, that it's going to be a very close thing if the grid there is safe. ERCOT is not affected by severe weather and huge demand. So that's that future. The rest of it, we're in a disruptive and disrupting decade. And John has just touched on almost all of the things that are in disruption. I think personally it'll be a period of up to 3 years before everything gets into equilibrium again. That depends, of course, on a conclusion to the war, which is now 105 or 7 days old in Ukraine. It cannot go on forever. But it also, there will have to be various new alignments to take care of new realities in the world. We're going to be very short of fuel, and we're going to pay a lot of money for gasoline this summer. We're also going to be short of specific food items in the US, not across the board shortages, but some things will be in very short supply. Much worse case in the rest of the world with grain shortages, particularly everywhere from Egypt down to Cape Town, are going to be severe. Parts of Asia as well will suffer severe grain shortages because of the cutoff from Ukraine, and because there was a tightness in the grain supply anyway, which was somewhat overlooked. We're going to have to make big adjustments. People are going to question at some point whether it makes sense in the US to convert corn to ethanol to add to gasoline, when corn is very valuable in everything from a feedstock for cattle to human consumption. Adjustments are the order of the day, and they're going to continue to be made until a happier time of equilibrium unfolds.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, we have a great guest, and I'm wondering how she's doing today, and we'll get her feedback into it. So, Kathy Kuras, how are you, ma'am?
I am doing well. Thank you. And thanks for having me today.
Well, thanks for being with us. We are so excited to get to spend some time with you and hear where you're up to. But before I get to dive deep into that, for the audience that is on and listening and watching that may not know who you are the president and CEO of YMCA Austin, and you're going to be with us for the hour. So lucky us. And prior to YMCA Austin, you were the COO and EVP of Strategy and Innovation at YMCA Boston, and senior consultant at Triangle 2 Solutions, and senior director of organizational change management and director of career development at YMCA USA, and VP of member experience at YMCA Greater Charlotte, and AVP of program development at YMCA Dallas Metro, and lucky us, a sergeant at the U.S. Marine Corps. Thank you for your service. And prior to all that, she managed to get very, very well educated with a Bachelor of Arts in Music with a minor in sociology from Loyola University, New Orleans. Here we go. Another New Orleans person, in a master's in organizational development and leadership from Springfield College. Drawing from her arts background, she's also a filmmaker and co-founder of an independent music and film company called the Vanguard Muse, which produced the award-winning documentary Open Field, which first premiered at the Austin Film Festival in 2020. And she also holds certificates in Six Sigma, human-centered design, and net promoter. Welcome, Kathy Kuras, to the program.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Well, we're delighted to have you. So Kathy, you have a unique perspective. You have been, for the most part of your life, an YMCA person, changing the world one day at a time. What's your take on COVID, the pandemic, and what's going on in 2022? We tend to talk about this in this program, that digital transformation has been benefited in many ways from the tragedy of COVID. It has accelerated many things that perhaps didn't happen or would never happen, like everybody being an expert on Zoom and telecommuting and many other things. So what's your take as it relates to the YMCA? Has COVID been a total negative, a total positive? What say you?
Well, I think there's probably a little bit of a balance of both. I mean, COVID affected the business side of the YMCA and many nonprofits in a very dramatic way. We were one of the organizations that had to shut down for a number of months. And at the same time, it provided us with the opportunity to really listen to what's most needed in the community and begin to create new offerings. And so that may have been in the fitness world. We created some virtual fitness programming, for instance. And so to that end, I think the digital piece has been very important. As I look at, though, coming out of the pandemic, so to speak, what we're hearing the most from folks about is childcare and affordable childcare, access to childcare, so folks can get back to work. So there's this whole cycle that's happening around the workforce and access to affordable childcare. Right now, we are providing as much childcare as we can. We were in over 70 after-school campuses during the year. We are the largest provider in the Austin area. And at the same time, there's even more need than what we were able to provide, because we're also challenged with the staffing challenges. And so this sort of vicious cycle around staffing, employment, childcare is something that we're paying a lot of attention to. In our wellness areas, what has really risen to the top is mental health and mental wellness. And so when we look at, I think you said it well, Llewellyn, this idea that we are in new realities, and I think we're going to be in new reality for a really long time. And there's going to be iterations of products, programs, services that we create that we're going to have to continue to iterate on a regular basis. We're not going to settle into anything for a while, is what I believe, because things are changing so quickly. The needs are advancing so quickly. And when I think about the digital component, there's hardly anything that folks do today that doesn't have some level of technology or digital component to. People that come to the YMCA to work out, most of them have some sort of gadget or device that they're tracking what they're doing with, or they're doing it interactively with some level of, virtual fitness. Kids in our after school programs and team programs we're doing lots of work with STEM and robotics. There's a whole technology component to that. We're developing a camp in a park right now that we're looking to have it be one of the most sustainable camps on the planet. And there's a whole technology piece to that. So sustainable both in design and also in education for kids, so that children can grow up understanding what it means to take care of our planet. So for us, to me, it's almost like everything shut down in a way to then open our eyes to what is most needed in some of these very emerging needs and what is possible for the future. And all of it is having us take a brand new look at what we're doing across the board.
Amazing, amazing. Well said, well fed. And Llewellyn, any thoughts?
Well, I'd like to ask some questions, if I might. And we all think we know what the YMCA is. We know it's got something to do with swimming pools, and we've all worked out in the gym there at some time in some city somewhere. But I think it would be awfully useful if our guests could tell us the history of the YMCA and how it comes to be involved in such a panoply of social activities, a sort of almost alternative government, if you will, taking care of everything from childcare to mental health, as well as, I assume, places for people to work out.
Yes, sure, absolutely. So I'll do my best to give a bit of a brief history, but the YMCA started in London, England. And it was during the Industrial Revolution as young men. So the title is Young Men's Christian Association, but as specifically young men were coming in from rural areas into the city as part of the Industrial Revolution, there was a young man in his early 20s named George Williams that noticed that these young men out of the sort of support that they had from their families were beginning to get into a little bit of trouble. And so they were getting into all sorts of activities that were not the most positive types of activities. And so he started a club to help with that. And over the years, it has evolved into this worldwide organization. And what's great about the Y in my mind is that every YMCA can take a look at their community and develop the programs and services that are needed for their community. So in one community, that may look like a lot of fitness centers and after school programs. In another community, it may look like I think about a YMCA in South Africa where volunteers come together and they take bikes and they go out to villages and they do education programs on AIDS. So it can be anything. At one point in the US history, the YMCA was the largest provider of sort of what is now motels. It was one of the first places that people stayed when they came to the United States as they immigrated in. And we've helped develop a lot of, everything from activities like basketball to group swimming lessons to becoming the largest provider in childcare. And so for me, at the heart of all that is what's in the DNA of the Y is innovating based on needs. What I think is trickier today is we're having to do it much more rapidly than we've been used to in the past. We don't have time for a need to surface to a point of maturity and then sort of respond. We've got to respond a lot more quickly.
Wow.
That's very interesting. You touched on several things. One, I stayed at the Y a couple of days when I first came to the United States. Thank you for your accommodations. But also that period in London during the height of the Industrial Revolution, where conditions were terrible. There were so many durable self-help organizations. The Y was the most successful, but there also was the Boys Brigade and the Boy Scouts, all of which had the same essential genesis: do something about the problem from within rather than solve it from without. And I think that's very important.
I do
Yeah.
too. And what I'll also just quickly share on that is worldwide. So there's a World Council that meets, I think it's like every 3 or 4 years. This year it's in Denmark and Aarhus. And a few years ago at the 175th celebration of the YMCA in London, England, young people who are part of the Y movement had sort of rose up and said, hey, leaders who've been around for a while, we've got to start paying attention to some things at the Y that we haven't been paying attention to as much as we should have. And one of those is around a sustainable planet. And I think I mentioned that because the YMCA was started with somebody very in their early 20s. And today there's young people in the Y that are really helping shape not just the future of the organization, but the future health of their communities. And I think we're at our best when we're engaging and listening and helping to sort of activate young people in that way. And that's another key component that I think we've got to continue to pay even more attention to.
Yeah. Johnny?
Yeah, Kath, I want to talk about some of the business models from more recent times, whether it's the work and whether it's childcare and what do we do about that and how kids grow up. Llewellyn, my mother had a full-time housekeeper, so I never had to stay in the YMCA. And I probably built the YMCA that you lived in. Right. So, Kathy, let me ask you this. Seriously.
It had certain deficiencies.
Kathy, how would you think about planning the whole idea of childcare? We like to think of childcare as a learning experience also, right? And we look at what we have now. Of course, the government got involved in early child development, but it didn't take the place of the individual kind of communities where people can actually, where people can actually plan around it. So I grew up on the North Shore of New Orleans, and every house was a YMCA. So when you think about people working, and when you think about the children, and when you think about a business model, can you perceive that the YMCA will get into a situation where for every community they design the child care activities? Because we've got to go just beyond people working and take care of the children. How do you see that business model in the future? Because just as in England in the old days, young men would get into different kinds of problems. How are you guys planning for that?
Well, thank you. I think that's a very important question. And I can share some of the ways that we're looking at it, but I will say, Johnny, we don't have all the answers. Like, I think this is a community issue that we've got to come together as a community to solve. And what I will say is, there are many organizations that are approaching this, from the United Way to the YMCA and a number of providers. And I think the key from a process standpoint is us working collaboratively on it and looking at it from a systems perspective and where each of us can sort of fit into the system and where the gaps are. I think where Austin has especially a great opportunity is for that to happen in an even more formalized sort of regular way. From a business model standpoint, though, one of the benefits that the YMCA has had is our business model is made up of a number of different revenue streams. So I kind of consider them, they're like legs of a stool. So we have membership revenue that comes in for our centers. We do have program revenue that comes in from anything from sports to after school programs where the parents that have the means to be able to pay. And then we also have a whole world of philanthropy around fundraising and grants that we have. The reason I mention that, if any one of the legs of our stool begins to have a little bit of trouble, we have another couple of legs that can help keep us propped up. We're not dependent on any one leg. And so, for instance, in something like after school, we have a number of sites where we provide after school that it costs us to be able to run that program. So we can supplement that with fundraising or philanthropy. Sometimes we're supplementing with other operations like membership, or there's a bit of a balance that some areas where parents may be able to pay more can help areas where they can't. What I will say is increasingly that need is growing, especially in the Austin area in terms of affordability. And there's more and more people that need that financial assistance. So we've got to figure out ways to bolster the other areas and other revenue streams to be able to make sure that we can continue to provide for everybody. Our mix of revenue helps a lot. And it helps us to be able to keep sites open and to continue to move forward, even coming through something like this pandemic. But I do think the longer term solution, there's got to be a conversation that's a collaborative conversation among multiple agencies, government agencies, the corporate world. I think could have there's a great opportunity here for, sponsorship from corporations, for instance, for childcare sites or after school sites. And it's got to be this idea that we have to look at kids as all of our kids, and how are we all going to come together to make sure this whole community of children has the supports that they need. So it's a little bit of an answer, but also it's an aspiration around what I think we're going to have to do to figure it out.
That's a good answer. When you look at the statistics, we have probably 60% of kids being born to single parents in America now. We've got about 40% of the white population, about 60% of the Black population, and ditto for the Mexican American population. In the 1960s, that was reversed. That situation was reversed. How can we get back in terms of discussions at the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club? I'm very involved in the Boys and Girls Club, to the whole idea of family and what family means in terms of not the alternative family, but what family means in terms of what's important for the kids. So can you see any kind of teaching or learning revolving around what I call the core issue, which starts with the family?
Well, I think there's certainly opportunity for us to have conversations in our communities and with those that we serve and others. I think it's layered in terms of what's really needed to support kids in life. And the family is like sort of that closest, like first circle that you have in your life. And then there's other layers to it. And I just am saying that I think we need sort of a multi-layered strategy to really understand it. And also, Johnny, I'll say there's a lot of statistics out there nationally, statewide, citywide. There's different organizations that have the various research that they follow, but it's very hard to sort of get a true handle on what's happening in any one community if you're looking at it from sort of multiple resources and multiple areas. And I think to even start a conversation about what do we do about this, there's a level of assessment that I think is really needed to go even deeper to understand where some of the gaps are, so that we can think through some of those supports. But I think having the conversation about families and all the various supports that kids need, I think is needed, and we're happy to be a part of that.
Kathy, you've told us about the extraordinary range of the WISE activities. Is there one that predominates? What do you think of as the key mission of the Y?
Right. So for the YMCA in the United States, our cause is what we call it, is to strengthen community, or strengthen the foundations of community. And then it's up to each local Y to look at where they're focusing. And so for us in Austin, we're in a strategic planning process. So this is a wonderful time to have this conversation. And we're going to be having community listening sessions, and we've already started focus groups out in the community. So we want to really listen and understand where we can help and support. But our focus primarily is going to be on how do we help elevate quality of life. And that has to do with everything from health and wellness to activities that connect families with themselves and with others, to inspire and educate. So all of our work around childcare and education support. We've run 9 preschools, for instance, in the Austin area, as well as early learning readiness programs. And then how we help to drive community change. And we really do see that as an organization, it's not just sort of the leadership of the organization that has a role in it. It's our members that have a role in it, the families that are part of the organization. so that we can help convene people, I think is one thing that we can do very well around anything that we're working together to solve. But that's where our focus is on.
Thank you.
If I may, real quick, Llewellyn, Kathy, I think that you come into town and being here about a year or so, and your background, it's really a great opportunity for many things. And I would think from your point of view that, and I don't know, actually, we haven't talked about how you ended up in Austin, why you chose Austin as a challenge, but Austin has a phenomenal platform these days as one of the fastest, most exciting cities in America. And it is a high-tech city for many reasons, thanks to John Butler, Dr. Kosmeski, and many others. And when you think about this vortex of, all these transformations that are happening in society, telecommunications, the trends around smart city, sustainability, smart energy, transportation, mobility. How do you realize or figure it out how you impact, leverage the platform that you have today? And obviously some of the thoughts, you have, it'd be great for you to share a little bit about why you've joined Texas State Cedar and all the sort of possibilities of working with the university and help you with that journey. But tell us a bit about how do you envision not just reacting to the population, but also leveraging and embracing and leading as you take advantage of technology and what Austin is about.
Sure. Well, thank you. And what you mentioned about how Austin is growing and the technology and innovation that's happening here was very much a part of what attracted me to come to Austin, as well as the fact that I grew up in Dallas and most of my family's still up there. So from a proximity standpoint, but that was certainly a big part of me wanting to come to this area specifically. And, if I go back to the history of the YMCA, is this idea that we can innovate and we can evolve and we can change with the needs. I'm very interested in how we are doing that within the landscape. I think, this idea of the Texas Innovation Corridor, from Round Rock or so down to San Antonio, I think all organizations have an opportunity to help define what that means, not just let it be defined, but help define that. And I think nonprofit organizations need to be at the forefront of that. It's not just about the products that are getting created, it's about how people are going to utilize those products. And so we have the people. We serve close to 100,000 people a year just in our association. If you combine the 3 associations in that innovation corridor, it's millions of people that we're touching, and we're working with people where they live, where they work, where they play, in ways that we can help, I think, with a lot of these technological advances. And so for me, joining Cedar is about being at the table to understand where things are going and finding out how we might be able to fit into that. I mean, you and I have had a couple of conversations about ideas like, could we find a way that with treadmills, that somehow the energy that people are creating on a treadmill is connecting to a grid, and then people can choose where they're going to send their energy that's helping to power something, and hopefully our grid won't go down, by the way. But it's just like this whole idea that, like, if we open our eyes, we can see it everywhere. And we are willing, one of our board members, Paul Hoffman, who's the president of calendars.com, he said, Kathy, let's be the test site. If an organization or a company is looking to try to test a solution, we can be a place where that can happen. And between all, as you mentioned, Llewellyn, all the various activities we have with people of all ages, we like to say cradle to career and the great beyond, frankly, we have the opportunity to do that. And so we want to be not just at the table, but we want to be, part of the thought leadership that's thinking about how all of this, the human interaction with all of this, especially, in addition to the fact that we do have, we run a number of buildings and assets and properties, and we want them to be, technologically advanced and sustainable and all of that too. But we want to be a partner in this as we go forward.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I wanted my my colleagues to hear that, and now they have many questions. Dive into it.
Well, it's interesting. You'll find, as I said, I was involved in the Boys and Girls Club for the last 20 years. We built a new building, and the philanthropy was just outstanding. That is, we came together as a community and said, our Boys and Girls Club is not what it should be. And it was led by Ben Barnes, the former lieutenant governor. And what we did was to really come together, and we sort of integrated it with all of the organizations. To say that we started and we built a brand new building, which by the way is near your YMCA. And as you know, the golf with Ben Crenshaw came together and built a golf course on your property for the kids. So I think you'll find that it has been a community always of philanthropy when you put your mind to it. I think going forward in the future, what we have to do is look at all of the opportunity structures that we now have in Austin, which were different than say 25 or 30 years ago. For example, I play classic guitar, all kinds of guitar, and we did a classic guitar for our Boys and Girls Club, and we got 3 scholarships, right? That went out to a USC. So, and we're doing about 98% high school graduation rate for people who hands-on Boys and Girls Club. I always looked at the YMCA as a great place to go to interact with different kinds of people, to play sports, and to do lots of things. So I think if we coming together, if we get with the philanthropy community, and if we get with a different organization, and remember, it's not just Austin, it's Round Rock. It's the whole Austin region that we really talk about. I belong to an organization called ARROW, the Austin Area Research Organization. And that brought all the leaders from all the small towns around Austin, Texas together to talk about highways, to talk about schooling, to talk about what it means. And of course, everybody wanted to stay Round Rock. We don't want to be associated with Austin. But history, of course, is bringing us together. So my question is, have you thought about that regional tone of the corridor tone from here to San Antonio, through San Marcos, maybe all the way to Columbus, Texas? Because we are developing much like the Northeast now, which has the finest schools in the country, has the finest support systems in the country, from Maine to New York to Philadelphia, and have always produced the best and the brightest. So right now, as the population shifts from the Northeast, because of opportunities, we need to have the same organization. We need a Princeton, we need a Princeton, we need a Harvard, we need a private school where the tuition is $100,000 and nobody blinks. That's the Northeast, right? How do you separate the best and the brightest? And the Northeast has done that. So my question is, how do we think about the future, what the YMCA can interact, and how can we really get on with it for the next 100 years?
Sure. Well, that's a really great question. And I don't have the full answer to that, but here's what I will say. Well, one, let me mention this. The YMCA that's up in Williamson County, as well as the San Antonio Y, my colleagues in those areas, Jeff and Sandy and I, we meet regularly, and we're working on how we can be more connected as an organization. So we are thinking about this entire innovation corridor and our region. Everyone's saying this is going to be the next, this is set up to be the next metroplex in the United States. So you can just drive up and down 35 and you can see it, and not to mention what's happening, out east and west as well. So we are very much in that thinking, wanting to program more together, but also think about future growth together. For me, you mentioned the university systems, and having lived in a city like Boston, where you can throw a rock and hit a university, pretty much from anywhere. We actually think about it a little bit more, meaning a lot more upstream than that. So for instance, we know that children at a very young age begin to see themselves as, something like getting into science or engineering. Is that for me or not for me? And so where I'm focused is, how do we help children begin to have experiences that can get them interested in the disciplines that are critical to the future growth of our country way early on? Because by the time folks get to the university, That's already been sort of weeded out or figured out. And there's extremely intelligent, talented kids that just don't have access to some of these more STEM or STEAM, let's put the arts in there, related activities early enough to develop that interest. So that's what we're working on in our preschools and our after school programs to help complement the schools in that way, is to have kids have these experiences much more early on so that kids can see it as a possibility. Because that registers extremely early on in a kid's mind. Can I see myself in this place or not? And that's where our focus is in terms of that. I think more effort in that area, then you'll see everything downstream begin to happen differently.
Yeah,
Just gotta get further upstream.
I've taught at Rutgers and Boston College. Look, and they have boarding schools. Everything is geared toward education. We just haven't valued education much in the southern states, period. Now, I happen to be from a state where music is it. I mean, we learn to play everything is music. But I'm talking about in the Northeast, where you're picking the best and brightest from the very, very earliest, with opportunities for them to develop in the arts. You're right. I mean, the daycare centers in the Northeast, they cost just as much to go to college, right, as we do. So I think we have a lot to do in terms of getting in the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club, getting the opportunity in front of kids so they can say, I think I want to do this, rather than wait until they get to high school even. I think the Northeast has done that extremely well.
Yes, an example to iterate your point there is I was having conversations with one of the directors of the Innovation Center at Boston University a couple of years ago. And we were taking a look with them at what we might do, let's say, with some of our after school programming. And she was sharing with me, for her preschool age kids, the deciding factor on the preschool that she put them in is that they have maker spaces, and they're teaching basically the beginnings of innovation at preschool. I was sitting here thinking we'd be innovative starting in after school, which is school age kids. And what she was helping me to see is that as the folks that are being very sort of selective about this are looking for things even earlier than maybe how we would have thought about it in the past. And so, and there's a lot more science that's come out of like MIT, for instance, that's showing that kids can actually learn much more complex things than we thought at earlier and earlier ages. So I think part of it is we have to ourselves be educated in understanding what's going on. And I do think this goes back to something like systems thinking. A lot of the best systems thinking and systems mapping that I think is happening in the country is happening in areas like Boston, or it's academics out of Boston that are going to other areas and helping people do that. So I go back to this idea, if we can become more educated ourselves, and I mean we as, community serving organizations, corporations, universities in the area, and then if we can begin to do some of this systems mapping and thinking work together, we can figure it out. Because here's the cool part about Austin that I love is that I can look at other cities that I've been in, and people do, at least the experience I've had so far, maybe I've had just an off the wall experience, but anyone that I've met with from another organization everyone is wanting to help. Like there is a spirit of, let's get together and do it. I think what's missing is some of those formalized frameworks that can help us do that more effectively, but there is a desire to come together and figure this out. That's not every city that I've been in. In some cities, people just want to kind of hold on to their space or their world, or it's got so many generations of silos that it's hard to break it down. That's not Austin, not in my experience anyway. So I think to me, that gives me a lot of hope. I do think we're missing some of that formalized sort of frameworks that could accelerate our ability to get after this.
I wanted to take us into something, Kathy, that we have discussed, and I'm still looking forward to some of our up and coming sessions of brainstorming. You both have touched on a lot of things that I think is really serendipitous or divine intervention, or however you want to call it, Darwinism, on where we are. When I think about the gig economy, when I think about what's going on with delivery, when I think about the convenience of the democratization of broadband, the governor's office created in September, the Broadband Development Office, they're issuing a report at the end of this month on the plan on how every a community in Citizen in Texas is going to have broadband 100 megabits per second symmetrical uplink, downlink starting out in July. There's billions of dollars coming down because of the infrastructure bill that the administration have passed nationwide. There's all this, building blocks of, Austin having the smartest grid in the nation, the electrification of transportation. And I see the why in what you were discussing with, we sort of talked about, and I don't know if you want to elaborate on it, the why lab, on how from A to Z, not just the little kids, but also the elderly and everybody in between can actually tap into the why. A lot of people think of the why is always being something for maybe the underprivileged or what have you, but I see the why really blossoming and helping transform every element of society by really driving this vortex of all these things that I'm talking about. How do you see that, Kathy? I think that the opportunity is tremendous.
Well, I love the word vortex, first of all, with all this. The why is a mix of society. Like I often say that, like it is the sort of reflection of whatever community YMCA is in, and that's why one YMCA may look very different from another and offer different services. But that means we have people at all in all sorts of groups, all kind of coming together in one place. And I think that gives us a social advantage in the sense that we can really tap into society as a whole, and we can learn from each other. Now, that doesn't mean that we do that every day. It might just be that folks are on a treadmill next to each other. They might say hi to each other and know not much more than that. But at our best, I think we're having connections with people that we wouldn't in any other part of our life perhaps be in the same room with someone, but you can have that happen at the Y. So to me, this idea of the people that we have engaged in the organization does provide an interesting lab, so to speak, to begin to have some of these conversations and to play a really strong role in helping to develop sort of future solutions and technologies and everything that will help further strengthen our community. I mean, that's why we want to do it. We just see technology as a tool to helping us do that.
Yeah, well said. Llewellyn?
Well, I want to say that I love what I'm hearing here. I'm a little bit flabbergasted to hear John Sibley Butler praising the Northeast. I did not think I would live long enough to hear that, but now I've heard it and I'm a bit astounded, quite shaken, in fact. However, I do love what you're doing, Kathy, and what the Y is doing. I think that this whole matter of childcare is hugely important. If we don't have childcare, we deprive our society not only of fully developed citizens, but we also keep a lot of talent out of the workplace, particularly women. And one of the functions of the revolution in women's participation in more aspects of national life has been to double the talent pool. It's been huge. Way back when I was president of the newspaper guild in Washington, we worked very hard to get women. At that time, there were no editors, there were, etc. And there's been a revolution. I spent a lot of time in the energy space, and there are as many women engineers I talk to as men, and that's tremendous. But it is partly a function of not being enslaved to the home, to domestic work, and of course to looking after children. What I wonder, Kathy, is how do you reach out to poor mothers, letting them know what's available, and how do you break the cycle of poverty by letting the children learn something they wouldn't learn otherwise in a normal family environment? Give them the excitement of maybe music, maybe doing something that will set them on a path and liberate their innate talent.
Well, so breaking the cycle of poverty is a really big it's a really big issue that frankly we need to solve in our country. And it's not going to happen from any one aspect, I think, as you know. Where I see our role though is, one, by us providing affordable, like let's say after school care and education, that allows a parent to be able to be at work and know that their kid is going to be in a very healthy environment, that their child is going to get not only help with their homework, but they're going to be introduced to something like robotics and other sort of STEM related activities. To me, that goes a long way in doing it. I do think there's something though about a sort of reimagining what sort of day-to-day life looks like. Like if we go back to your question about families, Johnny, like think about this for a minute. We have schools and we have certain hours that they take place. We've got these after school programs. We want people to work, but the timing of all of that doesn't always work out in the day-to-day life for people. And there's a part of me that wonders if we just kind of really stepped back and looked at all this, and we could reimagine, well, is there a way that we could put the school day, the after school activities, the work day in a more flexible way that can make all of this work in a way that parents can have time with their kids, that the kids can have the opportunities for education that they need, that folks can be at work, but the scheduling of it in some ways is it's all developed out of a time. It still comes from the industrial time, frankly. And so I think there's this whole piece of, and the pandemic maybe has given us a little bit of a hard stop to be able to say, we've got to think a little bit about what we're doing around just something as simple as the scheduling of all of it, I think could make a big difference in how people are able to spend their time and the quality of that time and still get everything that we need to get done in the workplace and everything else. So that's just one idea that I have, but I think it's going to take, going back to this idea of multiple organizations coming together and collaborating on a more systems approach to big issues that we need to solve, like poverty, and us all figuring out where we each have a role in that.
I love what you just said, Kathy, and I can't stop thinking about the vortex of all these capabilities that are in many ways seeding the possibility of a new platform that gets to be tested in society. Sort of like, we just never thought that COVID could actually have a great impact on the fact that now even every family member in my family knows how to use Zoom and telecommute and conversations, and we have different family conversations because everybody now dials in and creates a Zoom call, and this whole notion of being away is no longer a factor in a rich exchange. And so something that I want you to share as I'm looking at the time, and I would talk to you for 10 hours straight, is the work that is being done at the Moody Camp and your vision of that, and tell us a little bit about how you envision the Moody Camp and the opportunity of the Moody Camp transforming Austin.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. So we have a property, it's Camp Moody, and it's pretty much right on the Travis County and Hayes County line down near Buda, Texas, but only about 15 minutes from downtown Austin. And it's a beautiful 85 acres that was donated to the Y by the Young family that had this as just part of a family sort of land that they had and all of that. And so we have been working, the plans have been in place in terms of building a camp there for a while, and we've been working on various phases, and the pandemic came and kind of slowed everything down or paused it for a moment. The good news with that pause is it's helped us reimagine it a bit based on what is now sort of more needed. And what we're looking at is really turning this into a park that has a camp on it that will have much more accessibility to the general public as well as our members, and still doing all the work with kids with overnight camp and day camp and all of that going forward, but doing it in a way with a focus on sustainability, meaning that we have environmentally responsible design, that we're looking at hands-on experiences for kids to learn what it means and how sustainability works, like if we think about something like smart energy, and if whether we're doing something with solar or something else, we want the kids to not only know like, hey, solar is powering this cabin, we want them to understand how all of that works. And so in thinking about this as this beautiful place that people can come together from all over the region and begin to have these experiences as children, as families, to have all the fun experiences that you would have at an incredible park or camp, but also know that it's all happening in a sustainable way, and you're learning about that all along the way. So we just hired a chief experience officer, Brian Carter. He comes to us from Cap Metro, and his previous experiences include places like SeaWorld and zoos and all of that. And he is running point on this entire reimagination that we're going to work through with our board and volunteers. But it's very, very exciting to think about what we might be able to do with this intersection of nature and technology, and as well as accessibility, and do it all in a way that's sustainable.
Exciting.
You know what I really like about this conversation is, and as it's, to me, it always goes back to exposure. So if we take Brett Hurt, one of our great university guys now who is doing extremely well, his mother introduced him to coding as a kid, and he created Bizarre Voice. If you look at Willie Nelson, who picked up a guitar and became a great guitarist. If you look at Kellogg's Cornflakes, who wondered about what corn could do. When we get exposed to things, it gives an opportunity also to take it to the market, and that's the end of poverty. The end of poverty is we have to realize there are two things going here. It is a market where you can take your problems to the market, all right, and then you can get trapped in a situation where you're depending completely on government. And I think with the kids, exposure to different things, exposure to flight, exposure to farming, exposure to art. And I always like to say that the more you can expose kids things to, you go to school, so they say, all right, Dr. Butler, now that you have finished college, now that you have a PhD, what did you really want to do? You have pleased your parents. Now, what really got in your gut when you were 6 years old? All right. And I know, Kathy, I'm the best guitarist in Austin. I'm just not playing. I think if we look at how we expose people to things, we never know how they'll take to those things. When people are not exposed to the opportunities, and then that's when we have a problem. So let's talk about exposure in the YMCA. To everything from reading, right, to writing. Why do you want to become a teacher? Why do you want to become an executive? It's called social learning theory. For me to want to be a pilot, I need to be exposed to being a pilot. For me to want to be an executive, I need to talk to executives. So I think as long as we can expose and then get the naysayers out of the way of what you can't do and let them rock and roll. So that's what I would have to say.
I agree absolutely with Johnny. Well said.
Oh, I need my pill.
Be careful of your blood pressure, Rodney. Be careful. I would just add one word: expectation. Part of what you get in the Northeast, or what you get in the, say, the British education system, is the favored, the privileged, have an expectation of success, whereas the poor have no expectation of success. If you can spread, one of the geniuses of America, when it doesn't have too much rigidity, is this possibility, the sense of possibility of expectation. And I think you have to really inculcate expectation very young into people, so that a very small child can expect to be a pilot, or expect to be an entertainer, or expect even to grow up to a modest success like John Sibley Butler.
Absolutely. And I want to piggyback on something that, as I'm looking at the time, and I'm, you all know that we need to continuously promote our Digital 360 Summit that is coming up. And I wanted to, I kept thinking in the months behind our preparation that our event was coming up. And 2021 was a fabulous event, and I'm looking forward to the possibility. And I'm going to put Kathy on the spot here. We have 18 keynotes in the making, and I'm wondering if Kathy would be gentle enough and kind enough, and she doesn't have to agree today, but I think that having the why of Austin explained its vision of the future to this audience would be totally apropos. And Kathy, if you want to take that into consideration, we don't have to have a final agreement on anything today, but I would like to extend the opportunity to be one of those keynote speakers to our event, because the university and Texas State is trying to build the perfect playground for innovation to happen. But you are really the vortex into culture change and innovation of new cultures. And what a great relationship we have there already. And so I want to thank Texas State for sponsoring our session today, and really let you know that we would love to have you keynote one of the many events that we're having, and hear much in detail how you are doing culture innovation and leveraging Austin. I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments on that.
Well, first of all, I can't say no to you, Andres. So the answer is a resounding yes. Absolutely. One thing that I'll mention also is the reason that we're able to do this, and you'll know this, Johnny, from your work with the Boys and Girls Club, but the reason we're able to have this kind of vision is because of board members, as well as our staff members and the members of our organization. But the board is absolutely critical. And if there's anyone listening today that's excited about the things that we're talking about at the Y, I would love for you to contact me about potentially serving on our board. We have boards at our branches level, and we also have it at the metro level. But I mentioned that because we do need more board members from the technology industry, frankly. And that's going to help us be able to not just envision these things, but really make it happen. And so, yes, I'd love to be there, along with probably one or two of our board members too.
Sure, absolutely, Kathy. So, again, we could talk for hours with you, and I don't know if there is anything in particular, Kathy, on the coming months that you want to plug in for the audience. Any events, any activities, anything else that we haven't covered?
Well, I'll just say something fun. So we're doing something this summer called Summer Fun-tastic. And we have events at our Ys throughout the summer, and you can go on our website at austinymca.org. And it's spread out throughout the summer, and there's some really cool things happening. And most of those events are open to the public. And so we really want communities to come together, reconnect together in person if possible. So please check that out. Summer Fun-tastic.
Absolutely. Thank you. We'll do that. Llewellyn, any final thoughts?
Well, I'm so encouraged by what Kathy had to say, and particularly I like the way John raised the issue of possibility and it's very, very important. I think what Kathy is doing is stunning, compelling, and quite essential to the well-being and the future of the country. So I salute her.
I'm glad to hear that, from Llewellyn, Kathy, because Johnny and I have been trying to get our wonderful friend from East Texas to move to Austin. And maybe it is the why on Austin that's going to get him to do it.
Come on.
Kathy, if you don't understand this, East Texas is what Johnny refers to anywhere other than being in Austin. China is East Texas. South Africa is East Texas. It's the catch-all for people over there, people out of the chosen. And the chosen are in Austin, Texas.
Right.
Johnny, any final thoughts?
Yeah, as we said in the 1920s, we have the technology figured out. It's the people we have to worry about. Technology has always served peoplekind, and peoplekind have always screwed up technology. So going forward, I think that the liberal arts, the idea of what people do and how we think about technology would be very, very important. And your organization sits at the very, very threshold of shaping the next generation.
I just envision this gig economy and Kathy leveraging the why. I want delivery of the why thinking to my house. The why thinking to my ecosystem. I want people to get indoctrinated on the possibilities of this new culture that is being created at the Y. And God bless you, Kathy, for being with us. Thank you. And we'll look forward to staying connected, and we'll have you again. Johnny, take us away.
All right, Kat.
Thank you all so much.
You got a friend in me. You got a friend in me. When the road is rough, up ahead, and you're miles and miles from your real nice bed, just remember what your old pal said. You got a friend in me. You got a friend in me.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, thank you.